The last and largest part of the brain is the cerebrum, and often makes up so much of the brain's physical shape that people construe the cerebrum and the entire brain as the same thing. The cerebrum is really difficult to summarize in a simple way because it has so many functions. And most of these functions are spread all over. So it's not just a single lobe that covers any one function. There are 5 lobes. So you can see the frontal lobe is going to be on the anterior side. So this is rostral over here. So the frontal is going to be over here in blue. The parietal lobe is right here in purple. Each of these has a large gyrus. So the precentral gyrus in the frontal lobe and the postcentral gyrus in the posterior parietal lobe. And then these 2 lobes are separated by this central. And then these 2 lobes are separated by this central sulcus. We also have the temporal lobe down here in this kind of teal color, and then the occipital lobe back here. And I hope that you noticed at this point that these lobes have the same exact names as the skull bones that cover them. And so hopefully, having learned the skull bones, that learning the names and the locations of the lobes will be fairly simple at this point. There is a 5th lobe that you cannot see from the outside. So if you retract the frontal and the temporal, you can see this insula, which is deep to the outer version. We've already talked about the gyrus and the sulci. And so these gyrus are these large bumps. And so by having this kind of folded nature of the brain, it allows for a massive amount of surface area for the cerebral cortex, which is our thinking part of our brain. If you look at other mammals, most of them have a more smooth brain shape with not as many bumps as we do. So I don't need you to remember every single function for every single lobe. I would highly recommend looking at a few of them. So for example, the frontal lobe is where we have abstract thought and memory. This is where we have emotional control. This is how we act on our emotions. So we have emotions and then we can choose to act on them or not. So for each of these lobes, you should learn at least a couple of these functions. Most of the volume of the brain is white matter. So remember, white matter means it has myelin. So when we have myelin on a nerve, that means it's insulated and it's going to be able to send neural information quickly. So most of this white matter, its function is just to transmit signals quickly. So anywhere where we've got white matter is not someplace that we're doing a lot of thinking or interpreting, but mostly we're just doing communicating. We're sending information from one place to the other. And there are 3 different types of tracts. So tracts are just pathways of nerves. So there are projection tracts, and these are going to carry information kind of from the lower brain to the upper brain. So these are going to send information. You can see them coming all the way up through the brainstem. Here's that decussation where they switch all the way up through the pons, through the thalamus, up to the cerebrum. And so you can see these spread throughout the cerebrum here in green. The commissural tracts, commissure means that we're going to cross from one side of the brain to the other. And this is going to happen in the corpus callosum, where this is the only place where the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain are able to communicate with each other. So the commissural tracts are going to be here in yellow, going from left to right. And then association tracts are going to connect one place in the same hemisphere to another place in the same hemisphere. So you can see these in red. Sometimes these are short association tracts going from here to here. Sometimes these are long association tracts, maybe going from here all the way over here up to here. And so this is going to stay in the right side of the brain and just send this information to another part of the cerebrum on the right side of the brain. The actual place that we do most of our thinking and interpreting and processing are in the gray matter. And there are a few different examples of gray matter in the brain. We have the cerebral cortex. So if you look at this kind of section here, all of these darker regions around the outside is the cerebral cortex. And so that's where we do the most of our thinking. We also have basal nuclei. So basal nuclei are kind of these darker sections down here, as well as the limbic system. So the limbic system in our thalamus is going to have gray matter as well. But so right now we'll just focus on this outer region, the cerebral cortex. And you can see that it covers the entire outside. So by having lots of grooves, it gives us lots of surface area on the brain to have a lot of cerebral cortex. And this is only about 2 to 3 millimeters thick, but it does a massive amount of work. So it's going to integrate all of our neural impulses. And it does so with 2 very special types of neurons. The first are the stellate neurons, which receive sensory information. So these are here, they look a little bit like stars. And then pyramidal neurons, which are going to be output neurons. So these are these little pyramids. And these pyramidal neurons are the only neurons that are going to project into other parts of the brain. So you can see these are large pyramidal neurons, and these outputs are going to project down into the white matter and be transmitted to other parts of the central nervous system. 90% of our brain is something called the neocortex, and this is made up of 6 layers, and these are labeled here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, using Roman numerals. And this is the most evolutionarily advanced cortex of all different brains. So we have some regions of our cortex that are not full 6 layers, that might be 5 or 3 layers, but the cerebral cortex that is made up of the neocortex has the most processing power, if you will. And this has also been the most recent to evolve, and it's the most highly developed in primates. So you and I are both primates. So this would be the group that includes the great apes, chimpanzees, orangutans, gorillas, and our other kind of close relational species. So take a moment and explain the structure and the adaptive benefits of the neocortex.